Hi, I'm Rachel Lancaster, and this is the Magnificent Midlife podcast. This is where we celebrate women in midlife and beyond. We challenge the status quo and bash those negative stereotypes about being an older woman. We're not over the hill at 40, 50, 60. We're just getting started. And the world needs us now more than ever. I'll be talking all things midlife, about issues that matter, and sharing fabulous stories of amazing women doing very cool stuff. Now's our time. My guest today is Claire Hodgson, one of the stars of the fabulous play Midlife, which had a sellout run at the Barbican in London. She's the founder of Diverse City, the Bristol theatre company behind this production, and the co-founder of Extraordinary Bodies, the UK's leading professional integrated circus theatre. So Claire, welcome. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you very much, Rachel. It's great to be here.
So I'm really excited to talk to you, particularly about your play, which I absolutely loved. But of course, because of lockdown, it was a very long time ago since we met and I came and raved about your play. But one of the themes of midlife was diversity, was equality. And I know that was a very important part of the production. So particularly, why was that so important to the production? And also, how are you feeling now that we are in the middle of the Black Lives Matter movement kicking off in the US and all over the world?
Yeah, when we made the show, we really wanted to show a range of midlife women. I'm a white woman. I'm 49, and in a way, the joke is in the show that it starts off being all about me, which is sort of a comment on the way that white women take up all the room. And then the show is interrupted by Karen, who says, it's not only straight women who go through the menopause. And then Jackie comes in and says, it's not all white women doing yoga, and that she then talks about her experience. Although a lot of it is, comic, it's really about saying that, we don't all have the same experience in life because of our identity, because of class and race. And sexuality, and we need to listen much more carefully to the differences between us and how we experience the world. And I suppose what's going on at the moment is it's devastating and terrible, and I can only hope that we are in a moment of great transformation. I really hope for that, because the systematic and institutional racism that exists in our society, has to come to an end. And I saw a really good image last night, which was just a big banner saying "White people do something." And I think that Black friends and women that I've been talking to in the last 2 days, they are exhausted and broken by what they see, and it is time for white people to do something. And Black Lives Matter is a really clear message. It always was a clear message. The time is now for white people to stand up and end the way the world has been. I could talk a lot more about how it's also been played out during the pandemic. The pandemic has been different depending on who you are. And I was very disappointed to see that the government is postponing the investigation and inquiry into why the virus has killed so many Black and minority ethnic people disproportionately because of current events, referring to the race riots across America. And you just think, if the time is not now to have that inquiry, then when is it? It's absolutely the time for change, and we should all be working on that together now.
I agree. It really does feel like now is the moment, finally. Some of us have always been more aware of race than others. I mean, I've lived in the States, but I'm also, my son is mixed race. He's not Black, he's half Chinese. But because of that, I'm, my ears are pricked for sort of discussions around race. But I think now there's been a lot of discussion I've found recently about, the white liberal response, and that, we can get quite defensive, can't we? And we can, well, not you, but white women, and say, oh, I'm not racist, but that's no longer enough, is it? We have to actually do something. As you say, we have to be anti-racism, and we have to be
Yeah.
proactively anti-racism.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely it. That defensiveness and guilt and all of that, they're like emotions like shame and that, they're actually not very useful. And what we need to do is take action. And what it means is that we have to sit with discomfort and uncertainty. We have to look at all the decisions we make about all the time, about who we decide to be friends with, who we decide to involve in projects, who we decide to invite, who we decide to hire, who we decide to vote for. Every single decision we make, if we made different ones, then things would not be as they are. I think the feeling of hopelessness and helplessness is easy to feel in this time, but I think historically, if we look at moments of change, particularly around civil rights, when they come very quickly. If we think of the history of the 60s in particular, and we can also look to that historical moment and the positions that what white allies did in that moment in America. They were involved and they did take action and they did support Black people. There's historical moments we can look back to when white people acted, and now is the time to act.
I've just started reading a book that was recommended by a Black woman who made a really emotional video, and but the book that was recommended was Me and White Supremacy by Layla F. Saad. Have you read that?
No, I haven't. No.
It's apparently it started as an Instagram challenge in 2018, and then it became a PDF, and now it's become a book, and it's basically it's like a month. So she discusses one element of white supremacy on each day of the month, and encourages anybody who has white privilege to sit with their discomfort, to sit with their feelings. And I've just started reading it, and I'm going to do a book club in my community online, because I think we absolutely have to do something. We have to not just think this is somebody else's problem, because we are the problem. And already reading it, it's asking questions about how we just how we think and how we relate day to day, and the assumptions we make because we're white. It's very, very powerful. But how did you become so involved in the theatre aspect and the diversity? Where did that passion come from for you?
When I was 18 growing up, by chance, I was doing my A-levels and I just said yes to something, which is usually how good things have happened in my life. When I've said yes without thinking very hard, great and exciting things have happened. And it was to take part in a project where it was a theatre company were creating a big outdoor show with 100 people in it, and 50 of the people were disabled people, and 50 of the people were non-disabled people. And I went along, and I was a dancer on it, and we made this amazing outdoor show. And I met loads and loads of disabled people. And growing up, like many people, I hadn't met that many disabled people. As a kid in the 70s, education was really segregated. And obviously to a large extent still is, so that unless you have a disabled sibling or family friend, you often most people don't have that many disabled people in their lives. And I did this show and I just thought, gosh, the world operates in this way, in that disabled people just simply are completely separated in schooling. They're not often involved in employment. And I met my friend Jamie, who I now run the company with as a co-artistic director. And Jamie has cerebral palsy. And I think that moment changed both of us. He, as a disabled person, saw that he could be an actor. And Jamie has become an actor, and I saw that disabled people had to be involved and central to everything, because that's how the world actually is. And I grew up in a family that had a sort of strong commitment to social justice. So I had that from my mum and dad. So I grew up in that environment that people were equal. And from my mum and dad, I learned about, gender equality and race equality. And I suppose that was part of me going into my professional career, really, is that I just saw that if you never see yourself on stage, you never see your story told, you never see someone who looks like you, I think we all need that. We all need that to validate our identity and our experience. So, and I've just got a strong sense that the world could be much better than it is and much fairer. I've got a strong sense of injustice, which I've always had. And now I see my daughter having as well, which is a good thing, and not so good when it's about me.
Oh.
So I'm not being fair in my decisions, but I'm glad she has it, you know.
Yeah, that can be tricky. You teach them to be independent thinkers.
Yeah, yeah.
So I wanted also to touch on intersectionality, because that's something that has become so much more prevalent, that people are beginning to think about the levels of prejudice, aren't there? And that, I guess if you are a Black, lesbian, disabled woman, that's probably the worst of the worst in terms of all the privileges, or all the prejudices rather, coming together.
I think about it a lot, and I think about coming into midlife. You often examine your own identity a lot. In my midlife, I think a lot about my whiteness. I think a lot about my class background. I think about how these things have formed me. I think about my gender all the time. And I think if we were to move forward with much more of an understanding of intersectionality, everything would be better. Which is just acknowledging that people are at the intersection of different systems of oppression. If you're living a reality where you're oppressed because you're disabled and because you also are a woman, your experience is different. And I think I felt particularly about making the show that while I'm obviously glad always for everyone to talk about the menopause, that the conversations that were out there certainly didn't include or represent all women, and that we needed to have much more robust conversations. And I suppose intersectionality really acknowledges that we don't always all get on, because we see the world very differently. And I suppose the show tried to show that a lot, by us having confrontations with each other, and people saying really clearly, it's not like that for me. It's not like that for me. And I think that's how I've also been glad through my life, is when people have said to me, it's not like that for me. Your interpretation of what's going on here, it's not the same for me. And that's always taught me a lot. A lot of disabled people have said in lockdown, like, welcome, disabled artists that I work with have said, I'm like, whoa, how long is this? What's going on? And they've just said, welcome to my world. I've spent, my lifetime having restrictions based around my movement. I can't move spontaneously. Welcome to it. Think about what it means to always have to think ahead, order transport, have a very limited, because of the cost amount that you can travel, to never get on a train without a series of phone calls and bookings. Yeah, and indeed, with the lockdown, the first people to really organise themselves were our youth company, and they're young artists, young people, aged between 14 and 25, and the majority of them have learning disabilities. But the first thing they did was to get on Zoom and have their weekly session together. They were really immediately self-organising, and with the support of Ailish, our artistic director. And I was just really impressed, because they wanted that contact. But also I think people who've experienced adversity and barriers begin to work in a very practical way. That's been my experience.
That's really fascinating that they were the first to get going and do things. So what has it meant for your acting community and the whole production company while lockdown has been on? How, I mean, what is happening is I guess everything's just on at a standstill. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a pretty bad time to be in live theatre. Yeah, I have to hope that it hasn't been a terrible career choice for us all. We will be one of the last industries to return. The ways in which it's really venues are in a terrible position at the moment. They've had no income for 12 weeks, and many of them are weeks away from bankruptcy because they've sold no tickets. And the people who are really suffering in theatre are freelancers who are entirely who are not on salaries or not paid by organisations. Now, I was actually, my company now is regularly funded by the Arts Council, but that's only been for the last 2 years. And before that, I was operating very much in a freelance environment. And 70% of the people working in the arts are freelancers. And suddenly everyone has had all their work cancelled. There's no work lined up for people because we simply really don't know in the industry when we'll be able to return. I mean, there's been various thoughts about, socially distanced theatre going, but theatres and spaces need to be filled to a certain capacity to make the economics work. It would be fine to fill theatres to only 30% capacity, but then nobody will be able to be paid. So it's a really difficult time in theatre. I think it's absolutely essential that the government extends the furloughing scheme and the self-employed scheme for people in the creative sector, because we're not going back anytime soon. And the thing about our theatre is that it's world class. It's one thing that we also export all across the world, and it contributes an enormous amount to the economy through tourism and through people who live in the UK going to cultural events. We need support. As a company, we've paid our freelancers for shows that will never happen and rehearsals that will never happen. And we are just hanging in there. And we have stopped predicting what will happen because it was exhausting. And now we are doing our best to do things with what we have, which means that we're making a film with the circus company, with the artists at the moment. Everyone is filming circus in their own homes and sometimes gardens.
Fantastic.
And so we are working on that and directing. I'm directing that at the moment, and that will be released in July. And with the Midlife crowd, we are getting together and working out how we can film each of the characters, which is me, Jackie, and Karen, in our own environments, delivering monologues and straight to camera. So we're working out how we can create new work in this time, and we're also working with our young people, running workshops on Zoom, and our young people are performing cabarets on Zoom. I suppose a lot of the time we're also doing advocacy work around the ways in which the industry really needs central government support that will be returned to the government long term through VAT and tax from the industry. But we need centralised support. Otherwise, theatres in this country will be lost, and people who are really talented at this moment need support and a sort of form of basic income as artists in order to be there on the other side, really, and to be able to continue to contribute, because people have lost their income overnight.
It's so sad. It's awful. And to hear it from you in terms of, I mean, I have some exposure to the theatre world and to actors through what my husband does. And it's just absolutely, I mean, it's devastating for many people, but this is something that you can't see exactly how it's going to recover, even in the medium term. I mean, I was wondering, do you get any respite with like open air theatre? Because I know they've been talking about having drive-in cinemas. We could have people with binoculars in their cars watching the play.
There is ideas about doing, I think some theatres are thinking of this summer doing some drive-in work. And also the open air outdoor theatre will return far sooner than indoor, which is great. I mean, many of our circus shows are made for outdoors, but they all have to be in very controlled environments where people are still distant from each other. The challenge for us is that a lot of our performers are high risk. And so
Yeah.
it's not only getting an audience back, it's getting people to be able to perform on stage. And I suppose my concern is that when we talk about getting things back, there'll be some people through chronic conditions or disability or age who will not be returning anytime soon to gatherings, and in a way it's really important that we continue to create art that people can access from their own homes, actually. But my concern is also about who gets to return to the stage. If you begin to not include all the groups who are at risk, then you've got a very limited pool of performers and not very much diversity. So we need to really work together so that it's not a situation where a very narrow group of people get to be performers, because we've worked for the last 30 years to change that. And so we're thinking that in the future that we are simultaneously both a live and digital company, and that when you see a show, you would have a choice of ways that you could see it. You could see it in the theatre, but we will also commit to making sure that people who are not able to be in theatres will be able to watch it live or recorded and in various ways, and that we will create other digital pieces of art that people can enjoy. I mean, the positive in all of this is that more people may end up engaging with our work than in the past, that we may get to a greater range of people. When we perform outdoors, I always feel that it's quite a democratic thing. We often do our shows outdoors for free, and they're in parks, and it feels to me, and we know this from surveys of the audience, is that it's actually representative of the population in terms of age and disability and ethnicity. But of course, when we perform in theatres are not representative of the population. They are a particular demographic. And actually, in many places, theatre audiences are a much older demographic, which is an interesting thing with the virus. So the positives that I'm thinking about is that we may actually end up creating things that can go to more people and reach more people. And that would be a good thing. But I think, we spent the first few weeks trying to predict timelines for the return of live theatre, but we've stood down from that because we're in a situation of uncertainty, and we just have got to see what happens next, really.
Well, I'm very excited to see how you get that production to more people, because it was so powerful and it was so brilliant. When we were first interviewing, and if all of this crap hadn't happened, I would have said, everybody, women, you must all go and see this. Men, you must all go and see this. So in fact, yeah, I'm just going to go with the positive that hopefully, when you've been able to adapt it into whatever framework you do, you'll be able to get it in front of more people, because it is incredibly powerful and it's the first of its kind. I mean, there's nothing quite like it. So I wanted to ask you, why did you do the play in the first instance, and what have you learnt from doing it about midlife and menopause?
I wanted to make something about menopause because I was going through it. My menopause started at 44, or I had sort of pretty strong symptoms of perimenopause at that point. And I found it really hard to get information and good information. And I just thought, this is unbelievable. And that I have the skills, and I have a computer, and and I can go to the doctor, but everywhere I go, it seems that the information is poor, but also that I just felt I wanted to talk more about the experience of it in a more open way. And I found that I was having sort of hushed discussions at the school gate, which were sort of like, sometimes went well, with me going, oh, I think I'm menopausal, and another woman going, yeah, God, I am too. It's like, what are you making of it? Or people going, I'm definitely not menopausal, like being quite defensive. It hasn't happened to me yet. And you're thinking, well, it definitely has. But if you weren't, been looking the other way. But I felt I couldn't look the other way. I felt that it was an experience that was quite overwhelming. The sort of thing of chin up through it. I thought, I can't chin up through this. This is like quite strong, and I'm going to have to pay attention to it. And I suppose I created the play. That I would have wanted my 44-year-old self to have seen at the start of it, because my associations of menopause at 44 were so negative, and I was so resistant. And now at 49, I'm now menopausal. I no longer have periods. I'm in a different stage of it. There's so much that I wanted my 44-year-old self to know. And so I made the show for her, really, that 44-year-old who was a little bit, I'm not menopausal, this can't be happening to me, I'm too young. And anyway, it doesn't look like that's a whole heap of fun. And I suppose, menopause and midlife, I found a high degree of liberation in it, and so much that I wanted to say. And then I began to talk to Jackie and Karen, who were both in the show with me. Jackie was working on the show she's a sign language interpreter, and Karen was a audio describer on the show. And in the tea breaks, we would talk about menopauses or perimenopauses. And then I said to them in the tea break, I want to make a show about this. I think it'd be great. Would you want to be in it with me? Then I spoke to Sheila, who'd written a novel, and I know through political work. And I said, Sheila, would you like to write for the theatre? And Lucy is a really amazing director and friend. And I said, Lucy, I really would like to work on a whole thing about menopause and midlife. And so we began to create the team. And Vicky, who's the choreographer on it, she brought her dance company to the local village hall on the tour. And so I said to her then, I'm making the show and really would like it to have quite a strong physical element. So, my only role in it was having the idea to do it and to put the team together. And then those people together worked a degree of magic and created the show. The show wasn't, it was a tiny bit me, in that I spoke about my experiences, as did Karen and Jackie. And then Sheila made and created those with Lucy into bigger stories, and we involved other women's voices as well. But part of the rehearsal process was definitely that we told stories from our lives, and those stories all appear in the show. I mean, everything I said, everything in the show is true, apart from the fact I haven't got a dog. But actually, by the time the show was made, I was and have continued to walk a dog for someone else every day. So I pretty much do have a dog. But everything that we say in the show about ourselves is truth. And I suppose that's what people found when they saw it, is that I think people knew that we were telling the truth on stage.
What I really loved about it, well, there were many, many things I loved about it, and it's hilarious, it's lots of fun, was the fact that you approached the whole midlife transformation as exactly that it wasn't just a physical transformation in terms of menopause, but it was this period of emotional, mental transformation, of self-discovery, and you've talked about, that midlife is a time when we, question things about ourselves and start to reevaluate ourselves. And now we've got coronavirus and Black Lives Matter to make us think even more about stuff. But it really feels to me like this time for evaluating everything in life, and you brought that out in the play, which I thought was absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, I think that it's definitely for me, it was the untold element. I mean, that I discovered through experience, but that menopause and perimenopause, if you give time to it, can lead you to reflect deeply on what you want for yourself for the rest of your life, because it's a marker. It's a marker to tell you that time isn't infinite, and it is a marker of our mortality. But it's also, there's different words for it in different languages, isn't there? Like second spring and ideas like that. That you're going into your second spring, your new time. And I suppose something very definite happened to me, but I think it's not unique. Is that I fortunately lost that thing that can paralyze sometimes of caring very much about what other people think. And the great thing about aging a bit is that you begin to think, well, I'm going to do it anyway. I don't really care. I began to just think, I don't care if I'm going to do a show. I'm going to tell everything about myself. I don't even care if it's mediocre or not very good. I'm still going to do it. And I think that's the thing about aging, is that, I just began to care less about what was right, what was wrong, what other people thought. And, when I was a younger woman, I often, in my 20s, I had different teaching jobs, and I was fortunate to work with quite a lot of women in their 50s. And I used to watch them sort of like with curiosity, because I used to think, gosh, they're quite brusque. They're very brusque and very, very clear about what they do and don't want. And now, of course, I'm one of those people in meetings, which is just like, can I stop you right there? Can I just say that? And of course, that thing that I observed as a younger woman, I can see now. It's just that you have lived long enough and you know enough to just go, I'm going to have to stop this load of rubbish going on. I really cannot. And that healthy lack of patience, I think, leads to transformation, both in terms of how you interact with other people, but trying new things as well. And I've just been fortunate in my life to always have really brilliant women friends, both older and younger, and that's still the case. And being on that continuum, watching what's up ahead and remembering what was in the past, is really a fortunate thing. Yeah, it was very good to tell our stories as part of the show. It was very cathartic for me, and I think we found it more exhausting than we imagined. And I think, I kept saying to you, oh, we'll do the podcast, while one afternoon when we're doing the show in the evening. And we were so tired, just performing once or sometimes twice a day. Me, Jackie and Karen were just like, we had to have a lot of tea and a lot of lying down flat on dressing room floors, because we were not only performing, but we were telling truths, about ourselves. And it took some energy, definitely. But I have to say that sort of experience of being vulnerable and saying everything, or pretty much everything, has been a positive one, Yeah, a very positive one.
Yes, I guess it was like having an extended therapy session every night, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
it was definitely like, and of course, I can say it now, but it's one thing that we keep quiet in the publicity around the show. My mum is in the show and she appears in the show. And so a really brilliant thing that happened during the process of making the show is that Lucy asked us to go away and interview our mums. And you hear all of our mums' voices in the show, but you hear my mum's voice. And I just did this interview with my mum, and she was a bit like, well, I don't know if I've got any, first thing she said to me is menopause. Like, who's going to want to see a show about that? And then of course the more she talked to me, the more she had her story to tell about it. And we had this really intense sort of 30 minutes when I interviewed her for the show, where we talked a lot about my dad dying as well. And it was a good, and then that audio then went forward and became part of the script. And And then it was just, we got to a point where it's like, well, maybe my mum could be in the show. She could appear at the end. And I asked my mum, and in the way of things, because my mum, has only recently come to mobile phones. I sent her a text. My mum is actually brilliant with technology, but it's only been a part of her life more recently. And I sent her a text saying, would you be in the show? Would you do the Bristol Old Vic, and would you go to the Barbican with us? And then she didn't reply for like 48 hours, which is sort of normal for my mum with a text. But the rest of the team kept getting in touch going, has she said yet? Has she said she's going to do it? Has she said, does she not want to do it? And like as if she was sort of a Hollywood star replying to her. And then eventually she texted back and said, she sent me a really great text, which said, I've thought about this a lot, Claire. And at first I thought, God, I don't know if I could do that, be on stage. But then I thought to myself that me and your dad always told all three of you, me and my brother and sister, that you must always try new things. So I think I'm going to definitely give it a go. And so she sent me that text. And then my mum, came to rehearsals, came on tour with us, and did the shows at the Barbican and Bristol Vic. And it was such a great time for me and my mum because we got to spend every day together. We didn't have distractions like kids around us or, making the kids tea or whatever. We were just able to talk to each other all the time. And my mum also became friends with the other women in the cast, and they see each other outside of the show. So it was a lovely thing to have my mum in the show. We talked about a lot of things that we might not have talked about otherwise. And I suppose that's definitely part of midlife as well, isn't it? It's about getting your story straight. Like, who have you come from? Where are you going? And recognizing that if you still have your parents, that if you've got any housework to do with them, that it's a good time to undertake it. I understand my mum a lot more through doing the show with her. She told me lots of stories that I didn't know. And I think probably we understood a lot more about the ways in which we are very similar and the ways in which we're different. It was a very special time, and as it turned out, a really fantastic timing time, because we finished the last show on the 8th of March. So we were very tight up against, the theatres closed on the 16th of March. So we were really some of the last shows to be out. And we finished at a moment where it was completely fine and without thought to, hug, 50 or so members of the audience at the end of the show and to dance with them and, to be absolutely in physical contact with people. Because the ending of the show, a lot of women stay and talk to us about their experiences, but often people are quite emotional and want to hug. I think it's because each of us on stage, there's enough universality in each of the three of us for people. Parts of all of our stories will have some truth for people, I think, as well as being our stories, that people will be able to hook into the stories because they're about losing a parent, they're about living through a mental health crisis. They are many things that happen to many people, I think. Yes, and also to say that in the show is also a fantastic younger woman called Kandaka who sings throughout the show. And I really like her character because she is younger but also wiser than us, which I like that. There's also Anna who interprets the show. The show's entirely accessible to deaf people and indeed people who are visually impaired. We had really strong deaf audiences, particularly at Bristol Vic, which was great.
So if we bring the concept of midlife being a time of reflection, introspection, and that also when women come together and talk, we can actually be so powerful and so creative. I'm thinking that midlife women in particular have a big role to play in crafting a post-COVID and post-racist, she says, hopefully, world. what advice would you have for midlife women for how to take advantage of their power?
Yes, I read this really interesting thing, which was that in midlife, you're being rewired to care not only for a small group of people, but your rewiring is that your focus is beginning to be on the whole tribe, that you begin to have a much wider and stronger periphery vision, and you are absolutely becoming an elder in your tribe. And is part of the reason that many women post-menopause are really amazing activists and involved in social change, because we know that we have to make it better than it is, and better for the people who will come after us. So I think the only time we ever fall into problems is when we think that things are inevitable, that they have to be this way, that they had to turn out this way, that's how it has to be, or we follow the rules that have gone before. I mean, the virus has shown that we can basically provide people in a matter of days with what is essentially, universal basic income. I mean, through very complicated and different means, but we can ensure that everyone has access to money very quickly, that we can get homeless people off the streets and into accommodation within days and hours, and that everything can move very quickly when it needs to. And equally, all the childcare that's been paid for so that people can sit on trains for 2 hours in each direction to go to a stuffy office just to sit in one place when they could always have been at home and worked much shorter hours without any effect on their work whatsoever, has been shown. And I suppose our role going forwards is to, as women with experience, is to say that it doesn't have to be how it has been, and how things turn out from now on is not inevitable. The virus has, in my opinion, there's many things about it that didn't need to be inevitable, and still don't have to be, with different decisions made. It's very important that we separate out and have a clear sight of when political decisions are being made rather than decisions that are for the common good. But midlife women absolutely have a role in being able to say how we could organise things differently. And, when I work in groups of women, even women who are very different to each other, I often find an energy and an ease of working that is really invigorating. I definitely would say that was true for making the show. We had an all-female company. We worked very quickly and very efficiently because of all the other things that we're used to doing at the same time. We made that show very quickly and it didn't cost loads. And that's because we're used to really doing things in the most efficient way. Yes, so I think the combination of experience and clear-sightedness, we just have to always remember as women that we've been taught to doubt ourselves. So if we can overcome that conditioning and always think this is not inevitable what's happening, it can be different, then we can make great impact on the world around us.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Magnificent Midlife podcast. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, share it, and leave me a review wherever you're listening. It really helps me get the message out. You can find out more information about this episode in the show notes at magnificentmidlife.com. That's also where you'll find strategies, support, and resources to help make your midlife magnificent. Get clarity on how to make the most of your next chapter. Help me change the world, one magnificent midlife woman